Today, we have the privilege of having Henry Chamberlain with us. He's former combat officer, former global head of selection at Standard Chartered Bank, certified psychologist and certified coach, founder of HCC Global. He will share with us on future-proofing leaders. Over to you, Henry.
Thank you very much, Serena, and welcome everybody. This is a topic about which I'm obviously very passionate. And over the past 25 years, I've had the privilege to work with amazing individuals, teams, and organizations from across the world to learn best practices and to see what works, what doesn't work. And I'm hoping to draw on that to give you some insights on how we can future-proof our leaders and organizations using coaching. But I'm not only a coach, I'm also a psychologist. So I bring an occupational psychology lens to everything that I look at. So I look at organization effectiveness, at leadership effectiveness, at team effectiveness from a scientific perspective, from a behavior-based perspective. So what I'm going to tell you today may not always be what you want to hear, or it may not be what you currently believe, but it's based on evidence, on experience, and I value speaking the truth over pleasing people's expectations. So I hope that there would be definitely some new insights and maybe a little bit of discomfort from your side, because that's the edges of our consciousness where we really start growing and start making a difference. All right. Given that, I would like to start with two statements. Is that over 15 years working in Asia as a coach, as a consultant, as an occupational psychologist, I've noticed two things. The first one is that most of the leadership challenges that my clients face and that the people on my leadership development programs face are inner game issues. They are not technical skills. They are not a lack of knowledge. They're not the absence of an MBA. It's the ability to show up and function effectively and to get out of your own way. Secondly, we have not really reached the point where there's a majority of leaders who are really capable and enabled to engage their teams and to lead to their full potential. I'm really happy to see the results that a lot of people are not sure. Actually, we'll talk about that in a while, but leadership skills are one of the things that are critically absent and that we will talk about as what's holding leaders back in terms of future-proofing themselves. So with that as background and that as introduction, I want to jump straight into the content. And let's start and get on the same page in terms of what we mean by some of these terminologies in the title. So firstly, I would like to make sure that we understand what it means by future-proofing. And to do that, I'd like you to think of 3 years or 5 years ahead in your organization right now. What is the next challenge that you fear most, or the worst thing that can happen to your organization? Is it a global pandemic again? Is it a global financial crisis? Is it something in your organization itself? Is it going to be a new competitor? Is it going to be a national law? Is it going to be something that's impacting your organization in a traumatic way? Because these are the things that we talk about when we talk about future-proofing our leaders. But strangely enough, you will see later in the conversation that it's not only times of trouble that we need to future-proof our leaders for, but we also need to lead during good times, during times of prosperity and success. So let's think about that. What is going to be the worst scenario that you can think of? What is the best scenario? And in those cases, what will the organization strategy require? What will people require? What's going to pull your organization through that crisis? And that's the mindset that I want to bring to the conversation today. Secondly, leadership, I'd like to simplify that, and I'm not going to go into an academic discussion. There's two things of importance for me today. What great leaders do is they give organizational direction and they're the custodians of the organizational strategy. Whether you are a section or a team or a small group supervisor or a global executive, you are the custodian of the strategy and you need to tell people and show the way where they are going. So providing individual and organizational leadership. Secondly, the most important thing that most leaders miss is that the job of leaders are to achieve results through people, not to achieve results. So are you able to leverage the people and the human resources in your organization? Good. That's leadership for me. Lastly, probably the most important for this topic is what is coaching? And I've come up with a really simple definition that we adhere to at HCC, and we use that in our coaching practice, in our coaching training, and also in the coaches that work with us and deliver our coaching services. So it's the art of enabling others to have their own insights. Let's just pause there and think for a moment about what that means. It is not the traditional sense of telling people what to do. It's not a sports coach. It's not a big bully. It's not somebody telling you how to do things. It's not giving advice. So we definitely exclude from that definition mentoring, where I just share my experiences with you. It's not consulting, where I shove a off-the-shelf product on you or consult and find a solution for you. Coaching really in this perspective means the monkey stays on your shoulder. You own the problem, and I help you to understand the problem in such a way that you can solve it yourself. In other words, I'm teaching you to fish instead of giving you a fish. And I love the quote on the slide at the bottom that says, "You are not a leader unless you have created another leader that can create another leader." So if you think of your leadership effectiveness and of the people around you, these are the benchmarks that I use in terms of evaluating those statements. Right. So what does this have to do with leadership? Let's just look at some things that directly, I think it's quite obvious, but I want to draw the line very clearly for us today to go through. So first of all, leaders provide organizational direction. So if you want to future-proof your leaders, they need to know where they are going. They need to be confident in setting that direction, and they need to choose the right direction based on clear thinking, healthy thinking, uncluttered thinking, the best possible strategies that they can come up with. Leaders set the examples and the norms, and they tell us what's really important, what the real rules of the organization are. And people look at us to see what the organization culture really is. Some experts think and believe and has shown that up to 70% of your organization culture is determined by your senior leadership. So if you want to know what's happening in the front line of your business, just go and have a look at the management team meeting. Is there collaboration? Is there trust? Is there openness? Is there commitment to the same vision? Or is there conflict, distrust, competition that's unhealthy? So a significant part of what you and your leadership team does impacts the rest of the organization. And as I say, up to 70% of your culture is determined by that. Lastly, for this conversation, leaders impact the engagement and the motivation. And I think that's probably one of the biggest talking points for the last 20 years about leadership. Leaders are responsible for engagement. And that is connected to a host of organizational outcomes, including hard performance measures like financial performance, but specifically people performance and people retention. And people join organizations, but they leave leaders. So with that said, let's move on then. You may at this stage say, okay, Henry, nothing new. This is it. Most of you may agree with that because that's well known around it. So let's turn the heat up a notch. Let's go a little bit closer to the bone and we look at some uncomfortable truths. Firstly, behavioral derailment occurs during times of uncertainty and change. And if your scenario for future-proofing your leaders include uncertainty, change, and things related to that, you need to know that it will bring out the worst in your leaders, not the best. And you can fake it till you make it. But during times of difficulty, leaders fall back to their habitual behaviors, and it brings out the worst in us, not necessarily the best. So we really need to make sure that we have leaders who authentically lead and who don't only wear the hat of leadership when it suits them. Secondly, you are not as rational and logical as you think you are. I'll make that broader. None of us are as rational and logical as we think we are. Some people use the iceberg model and they say that conscious behavior is the tip of the iceberg. I'd take it one step further and you'll see in the picture there's actually a snowball. Conscious behavior is like the snowball on top of the tip of the iceberg. There's very little of our behavior that's really conscious and rational and logical. That might shock you. A lot of our behavior is on autopilot. A lot of your most important decisions and actions are made pre-consciously and emotionally. And if we don't understand that, and if leaders don't understand that, they are not functioning optimally. Now, getting really close to the bone and going back to that poll data is that global research shows that up to 60% of leaders are not competent. So if you are in that small percentage, in the 40% who thinks that you are competent or who think that you are competent, great, welcome. There's also the large group of people in this audience who said, I am not sure. So this is a great opportunity to reflect on that. Because if you don't believe me, just Google the words my manager is or my leader is, and you'll see what I'm talking about. So also reflecting on whether you work for an effective leader or not, or for a competent leader or not. So that means, or that impacts the thing that we've just spoken about, employee engagement. And in 20 years of research, Gallup, the global name in employee engagement, keeps on telling us that the dial is not moving. In 20 years since they started measuring, there's been marginal improvements in the level of people engagement. And since that's directly related to leadership, that's not a good CV that we write for ourselves. And that means that we need to look at leadership in the future, because even at the best of times, we seem to be suboptimal. Forget about future-proofing the next pandemic, the next crisis. We are at the best of times, not yet ready. So it's important that we go ahead and focus on that. And then lastly, something really uncomfortable is that there is no such thing as a problem leader. There are only problem organizations. It comes from child psychology. There are no problem children. There are only problem parents. And I can put hand on heart and tell you that none of the leaders who have behavioral challenges that I've ever worked with functioned in isolation. Every problem coachee had a problem boss or a problem organization that enabled their behavior. So we are not as aware as we are. Behavior doesn't exist in isolation, and therefore we all as leaders can do with a little bit of help from a friend or from a coach. Lastly, we live in a VUCA world, and I don't have to tell you that. I think the term is by now well known to all of us. The world is not stable. Change is the name of the game, and the only predictable thing about the future is that it will consist of change. That's not important, that's a known fact. But it's really important is that what is the impact on human behavior? And that's what I'm interested in as a coach. How will that impact my leadership? How will it impact my clients? How will it impact their effectiveness? And if you are not good, if you are only 40% competent at the best of times, then during times of VUCA, it will exacerbate those problems. So let's have a look at some of the known impacts of VUCA on our behavior. Firstly, crisis, uncertainty, VUCA type circumstances literally make us dumber. We go into fight, flight, or freeze, and those arrows on the screen shows you that your brain channels resources away from the thinking part, the outer core, that's your rational, logical brain, to the survival part of your brain. And it focuses on fight, flight, or freeze, getting you out of that situation. So unless we can manage those reactions, and they are manageable, we need to understand how the brain and the mind works. We literally make our leaders and ourselves dumber in the face of challenges. So that leads to a whole host of predictable things that the science has shown to us. We start seeking, when we are triggered, leaders and all other human beings seek certainty and avoid risks. That may not be something that's really cool for you and for your leaders during a time of challenge. You may want them to take calculated risk, not cower in a corner and hide away and climb in the highest tree to avoid the tiger that's chasing them. It gives us a narrower perspective. It takes away the strategic perspective because we are hardwired to focus on the challenge, the here and the now, the tiger that's chasing us, instead of where are we going to get food from in the next year, in the next month, in the next season. In the next part is that we also fall back on habitual behaviors. We fall back on things that protects us from changing, from protecting our fragile egos. And we all have a little bit of ego fragility. So we blame our bosses, we deny reality, we justify our behavior. And you just have to think about people around you during times of crisis. How many of them say, my bosses are all evil, my whole organization is against me, I cannot help it, I have no choice? These statements are often out of not connected to reality, not true for everybody, but for that person it is, and it stops us from changing, from adapting, and from being agile. In other words, we are not future-proof. So that includes the defense mechanisms, some of the ego defense mechanisms that I've just mentioned, and there's a whole host of ways in which we protect ourselves from change, especially when we're in the fight, flight, and freeze mode. All right. So I think that gives us a little bit of context of where we come from, where I come from regarding coaching. And in terms of the way forward then is I'm going to look at what are things that coaching can do to remedy some of these things that I've just mentioned. So it's very specifically based on the assumptions that I've shared with you and the thought pattern that I've established up to here. And I've picked 4 things. There are probably a million others that we could have picked. But I think the most prominent and dominant themes that we pick up in our leadership training, in our individual executive coaching, and that we also hear from other coaches are that people are not thinking strategically. So in order to future-proof our leaders, we need to help them to think strategically. Secondly, personal mastery, a very fuzzy topic, and I'm going to start with that one. So I'm not going to say too much about it. The ability to lead and engage and empower people is another critical element of future-proofing a leader. And lastly, emotional and mental agility, which is probably the culmination of all of these factors together. And I would like to briefly walk you through some of these factors and then give you an opportunity to ask some questions about them. Firstly, personal mastery. One of my favorite topics, and people often shy away from this in the face of hardcore things. I would rather do a hardcore strategy plan or a rational, logical solution problem-solving process than do things like navel gazing, reflecting on my own values, working on my own self-awareness. I'm really thankful that the participants today are also people who are interested in understanding behavioral strategies, understanding self-awareness, because those are things that coaches are great at if you use them properly. So this is about living intentionally. This is about being in touch with your inner compass and knowing who you are, knowing what your strengths and your gaps are, and also knowing how you self-sabotage so that you can get out of your own way. If you have clarity on your identity, values, and purpose, you can weather any external storm because you stand on a firm foundation. And it's very much underrated in the world of leadership and leadership development. Also, everybody's behavior makes sense if we understand the stories that they tell themselves, because a lot of the stories and beliefs and assumptions that we have are not true and are outdated and are not challenged. So unproductive thoughts and beliefs are a great area where we help our coaches to challenge them, to let them reflect on what the motivations are behind their behavior so that they can choose constructive and healthy strategies moving forward. And then lastly, resilience. It's the ability to not hemorrhage energy. It's like we are a special talent as leaders to hemorrhage energy by working too long without breaks, by not getting enough exercise, by drinking too much caffeine, by multitasking, by not sleeping enough. And that's a very important. Wellness coaching and resilience coaching is a very specific part where we can help leaders to future-proof themselves. So if you think that this is part of the soft stuff, it's probably the most hardcore thing that you can do in terms of developing yourself and your organization's leaders. The phrase that comes to mind is, it's not the size of the dog in the fight. It's the size of the fight in the dog. And personal mastery helps you to understand what the size of the fight in your dog is and how you can enhance that and how you can embrace your strengths. And in coaching, we meet leaders where they are. We don't change them. We help them to embrace who they are instead of copying other leaders, because that's where authentic power comes. Number two, this is probably the safest topic for coaching overall. A lot of coaches say, I'm a strategic thought partner. And it's probably a very easy thing to mentor, and it's very easy to tell. It's not that easy to coach strategic thinking. So in this part, I would like to step back, and I would like to help my coaches to step back and to say, let's disengage. How can you consider the broader picture? How can you think further ahead? How can you think of all of the factors involved? Systems thinking, because according to systems thinking, today's problems come from yesterday's solutions. So we like to think in ways, solve problems so that they stay solved. And then being proactive, taking a step and looking ahead. So what does that have to do with my thought process up till now? You cannot think strategically if you have blinkers on. You cannot think strategically if your mind is focused on survival and if you're triggered by your environment. So, and a significant part of my coaching work is helping people to come up for air, to take a break, to think strategically, to draw out their strategy, and to think about what they really want. Most people can tell you what they don't want. We are not really good at telling you what we want. So connecting with their vision. And it's amazing to see how, especially new leaders, but even experienced leaders, don't connect and don't have a personal vision for their department, for their organization. When I ask leaders, what is your vision for your organization? They often say, the vision is, and they give me the MBA textbook definition, instead of saying, this is what I dream of, this is what I desire, and this is where I'm leading my organization. So those are the type of things that we help leaders with. And if we don't do it, we are going to stay focused from crisis to crisis, instead of taking a helicopter view and being proactive in our organizations. Just a last thought that links to a next point is also, if leaders are doing what they're doing, they're stepping away from execution. They are seeing themselves as creators of leaders, as I've said in the beginning, instead of focusing on what needs to be done in the moment. The third of the 4 points is about people engagement. And I think we've been spoiled in Asia with a good economy, with phenomenal economical growth over the last nearly 3 decades. Coming from South Africa to Asia 15 years ago, I was amazed at how easily leaders fall back on paying people more instead of truly engaging them. Fortunately for us, that is changing. It may not be a comfortable thing, but things are changing. Leaders are becoming more aware of the fact that we don't have unlimited resources, and the real leaders are rising to the top. But it is a challenge, and I find that most leaders are not yet prepared to really unite people around a vision and a strategy, to build high-performance teams, to give people a voice, and to develop and motivate people. That next leader that builds a next leader that builds a next leader, and to create a leadership pipeline instead of clogging it by creating clones and copies of highly technically capable people instead of building great leaders. So we need to enable leaders here, and it's probably more than coaching that's required. On my transformational leadership program, we teach people how to engage based on 100 years of leadership research, how to build, how to engage. And I find that even though 90% of the participants know that it's not good to micromanage, to focus on hierarchy and control, when we ask their subordinates and their colleagues, the dominant leadership style across clients in Asia is still control, micromanaging, hierarchy. So we've got a lot of work to do there. And that is something that we are also actively working on. It's not just the one-on-one coaching, but enabling people to have the knowledge and the skills, but specifically the people engagement and motivation skills. Then lastly, as I said, emotional and mental agility is probably the culmination. And the picture on the screen is one of the movies that demonstrate agility probably most effectively. And if you know the movie, you are probably outdated and old. From The Matrix, it's somebody who can dodge bullets. The movie The Matrix in the 90s. So it's strongly influenced by your personal mastery, because if you are not strong inside, it's going to be really hard to survive the storms on the outside. It includes things like learning agility, change agility, and these things are definitely not rational and logical. The quote at the bottom of the page is really powerful. It's scary that Alvin Toffler said this in the 1970s. He said that the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So this is the focus of emotional and mental agility. And we help leaders by stepping back, by making them aware, by challenging their assumptions, by letting them speak out, and we play back to them, reflect back to them, and we give them an opportunity to also be vulnerable. So both in the personal mastery and the emotional and mental agility, giving people a safe space to reflect, not a soft or a vulnerable space, but a safe space to think and be honest and be brutally honest. A great coach must occasionally be brutally honest with clients. And by doing that, we help them to reflect. If not, we meet the situation where the very disturbing research shows that in spite of doctors' warnings and having had a heart attack, only 7% of people who suffer from a heart attack and who are told by their doctor that they will not survive if they don't change their lifestyle, only 7% of people actually make that change. So we have a long way to go to build this emotional and mental agility. And in leadership, it means we need to stop engaging in unproductive practices and engage in more productive practices. That's something that coaching is really powerful at doing. All right. So what I'd like to do, I see this as a toolbox, and I'm going to ask that we look at the poll again. Is it possible that we can launch that poll again? I'm not sure. Yep. Or otherwise, sure, we will go back and look at the results. That's okay. We see this as the things that we can do. There's a lot of things that coaches can do. And I see it as a toolbox, not a singular approach. Now, not all coaches are created equal. And at HCC, we really focus on selecting people and testing and making sure that they can really do what coaches need instead of what they think they should be doing, or just using a hammer as their only tool, as the old saying goes. So if we look at all of these things on the screen, these are just a fraction of the things that coaches can do for their clients. You have said that most importantly for you are behavioral strategies. So what would that mean? It means that we help people to understand what the challenges are that they are facing and what the most appropriate behavior is that would get them there. So let's assume that you want to become the CEO of the organization. Let's assume that your approach is that you want to become a law firm partner, but your style is very introverted. Your style is very quiet, very intellectual, not charismatic, not extroverted. Behavioral strategies in coaching helps us to understand who are you really. And I spend a lot of time in giving people feedback. We leverage psychometrics very strongly. Many people are still skeptical about it, but it's probably one of the most underutilized and most powerful tools in the toolkit of a coach, to help people to understand who they really are. And instead of leading like a world leader that they know, it is how do I lead like Henry? How am I the best Henry that I can be? And how do I leverage my skills and my strengths? And a good example is that one of the world famous people in recent weeks are Elon Musk from SpaceX, who has not only turned electric cars into an iconic movement, it's also been the first private contractor to put NASA astronauts into the International Space Station. However, if you read about Elon Musk, you will read that he's an incredibly abusive person who uses the F word 3 times in a sentence and who treats people terribly. If I coach him to be soft, cushy, bunny hugging, as many people talk about coaching, this will not work. We'll take away his mojo. But if we can help him to be the best Elon that he can be and soften the harsh edges but retain his mojo, then we help him to build an effective behavioral strategy. Behavioral strategies include anything from How do I deal with my difficult HR director? How do I deal with my difficult colleague? How do I deal with my difficult competitor? It's really stopping, stepping back, taking away your own blockages to that solution and thinking clearly to come to your own insights. So I'm going to leave the floor open to some questions. That's the core of what I would like to say, and I'll wrap up at the end. I don't know, Serena, how much time do we have for questions?
We're doing well on time. We have a good 20 minutes to go for a question and answer.
Fantastic.
But as the questions are coming in, I'd like to ask the first question. Henry, how do you know if someone is coachable?
Whoa, that's full on. I think that's a very important question that I learned very early in my life. My first coaching assignment where I literally failed dismally was when I took on somebody who was expecting me to solve the problem for them. And I worked diligently, day and night. I read all the books on the topic. And yet the person didn't change, and it took me a really painful failure to realize that I cannot coach people who don't own their own problems, who don't have self-awareness, and who don't have the willingness to carry the monkey on their shoulder. So the first thing that I look for in terms of coachability is ownership, it's awareness, and maybe a little bit of agility. Is, have you ever successfully made any changes? Now, that's not a key requirement, but if you are not able, if you haven't changed the habit in the last 15 years, you may have some challenges if you want to learn new and dynamic leadership behavior. So those are some of the things that I look at when I look at coachability.
So I guess, as you've mentioned, self-awareness is really important, and the willingness to change, since you are there to help them become a better version of themselves rather than change them as a person. Is that right? Great.
Absolutely. And I think that engages also in terms of the willingness to accept feedback. I often start a coaching assignment where, fortunately, that's not too often, but when we have behavioral problems and when a coach is contacted to say, can you help Henry, who's derailing at the moment, that first conversation is obviously is often involving justification, why I'm right and you are wrong, and why everybody else doesn't understand me. And unless that person can get to a point where he or she accepts some honest and harsh feedback, not always pleasant, not necessarily harsh, but unpleasant, we cannot move forward. And as long as you deny the reality, which is a famous defense mechanism, we cannot start moving forward. All right, let me stop there.
Great. So we've got a number of questions. You can type your questions into the Q&A box. I noticed there's a question in the chat. We'll come to that as well. So the first question, Henry, and you already touched on this a little bit. How can leaders increase their employee engagement, but using non-financial methods?
Fantastic question. That's my favorite question always. So you need to change your belief about what motivates people. And it starts with, if you are only interested in money, it's unlikely that you're going to change and motivate other people through other means. Sorry, I told you I'm going to be harsh. So it starts with you, and it starts with your underlying beliefs. Secondly, you need to know people. I'm really passionate about this, and in our leadership development programs, we really focus on what is it that you know about your people. And during the pandemic, so many people asked me, can you do a talk and educate my leaders on how to engage people at a distance? And when I asked them, what do they do normally? We find out that people cannot even engage their employees under normal circumstances in the office. So it really starts with knowing your people, knowing who they are, building personal relationships with them. And if you know that, you will know what their motivators are. People are inherently motivated. We just need to get out of their way, and we need to help them to connect with things that are really important to them. And there's a little bit of training, a little bit of knowledge, and a large amount of trust and letting go of some of our preconceived ideas that can supersize your ability to motivate and engage. We have seen that happen, and it normally creates massive energy circling out from the leaders who start changing those behaviors.
Great, thank you, Henry. Next question is from Soundari, thank you. Leaders as coaches, a big shortfall area, ? What are some of the strategies you use to convince organizations to go down this path?
This may again not be popular, The skills that makes great coaches in leaders have been universally identified as effective leadership skills for all times. So let's look at what are the two critical skills of a leader and a coach. It's somebody who listens and somebody who asks good questions and somebody who does not tell the subordinates what to do, but help them to find their own answers. So in what universe has listening ever been a bad thing? In what universe has allowing your subordinates to think for themselves ever been a bad thing? And I say that coming from military and being a trained combat officer. The most effective armies in the world have a boundary between hierarchy or a combination of hierarchy, but also people who can think for themselves. So in terms of how do I convince people, if you don't want to do that, you are not going to be bowled over by facts and evidence. But the reasons for engaging in that would be if you want to have people who think for themselves, if you want creativity to blossom in your organization, if you want to stop telling people what to do, and if you want to stop programming people, and if your leaders say, I'm tired of people just doing what they are told to do. But there's always a warning that comes with leaders as coaches training. It starts with being comfortable, because if you create highly engaged people are much more difficult to manage than disengaged people. Highly engaged people want to make a difference. They want to think for themselves. They don't accept mediocrity. And often when leaders and organizations engage on coaching, on engagement strategies, they find that it makes the leaders feel uncomfortable. And if you're not ready for that, and if you're not mature enough as a leader, you will go back to the old, safe, predictable way, because for the reasons that I say, engaged leaders or engaged people are much more demanding. If you want to coach, it needs to change the mindset of the coach first. And that's why organizations cannot engage in a lunch and learn session to create a coaching culture in their organization. It requires a radical shift in behavior, and it goes against everything that most of us have been taught about hierarchy, about telling people what to do, about people being lazy, about supervision, and about the fact that rules and regulations are necessary to make people productive.
Okay, thank you. We've got two questions about COVID-19, so let me ask those together. One is from Frank, thank you. So he asked, is the COVID crisis going to change the way you have been coaching? If it is the case, what will you focus on more? And then another question related to COVID was, with many people losing their job, how should a leader see this change?
Okay, I'm gonna start with the first one first. What will change? Can you just confirm, Tony? So what is changing in the COVID, and how will that affect my coaching of leaders?
What will you focus on more?
What will I focus on? All right. There's a lot of things trending on the social media in terms of the world is gonna change. We're never gonna go back to the old way. We can see that organizational paradigms have been rocked. We thought that we would never be able to work from home, and we do it. We thought that we could never do training online, and it now happens. There's an old saying that those people who say that things cannot be done must get out of the way of those already doing it. And I think this is my dominant position when I think about COVID. It doesn't say that everything will change. And it doesn't say that we have to be unproductive, but it really opens people's minds up, and it challenges, it makes life as a coach much easier. Because in the past, people say, I can't do that. That is not possible. And we can now say, okay, it's already happening. How do we make the best of it? From a perspective of what do I focus on? I haven't heard anybody during this time who hasn't said that COVID brought some self-reflection. COVID brought some self-awareness and thinking, why am I doing this? Why am I doing what I'm doing? And is this really what's important to me in life? So one of my favorite programs to run is an authentic leadership program where we take people through a year of personal transformation, the best year of your life. And we help them to think about what they really want and how to get what they really want. And to unleash the potential in them that's holding them back. So I think a lot more of that is going to become important. It's really hard to be confronted with yourself. But if you're searching for something more, if you're searching for something more satisfaction, if what you have at the moment is just not good enough, it doesn't satisfy, probably get a coach or join an authentic leadership program to really unleash those pent up energies and the pent up potential in you that is waiting to be unleashed on the world and in your organization. Secondly, when it comes to the downsizing, there's only one word that comes up: empathy and understanding. Your job as a leader is to achieve results through people, and that means you have to understand them, you have to have empathy with them, and you have to make decisions with the biggest love and the biggest amount of care that you possibly can. And if you think that's not your style, then you may not be agile enough and you may not be future-proof for this situation. Again, I'm calling it as I see it. It may not fit all of us. So we need to make tough decisions in a way that people will say, this is not what I wanted, but I felt respected. I felt treated as a human being. And you must treat them as somebody who's going to do business with your company in future. Are they going to bank with your bank based on the way that you retrench them? Are they going to shop with your fashion brand in the way that you fired them? Or are they going to become proponents against you and start working against your brand? What are people going to say online? That's the biggest question that I ask leaders during this time.
Great, thank you. That's a really interesting point. I hadn't thought about the online angle and what people might think afterwards. Next question. How to grow within the organization if your manager is not willing to coach? So this would be from the perspective of someone who they want to grow, but their manager is not coaching them. What advice would you have for that person?
So my question as a coach would be to that person is, what is it that you need to learn? What is it that you need to learn and grow? And if the person says it is impossible to learn and grow in this organization, which is a very big statement, I would say, really? Is there nothing you can do? Is there nothing that you can do in the face of your manager? And we really determine that you cannot grow, then you know what the next statement is. It's quite obvious what you have to do, right? It seems that you may not want to face that. What is stopping you from taking that step to unleashing or to growing or to moving to an environment that's going to give you what you really want? So how important is learning and growing for you? Why are you staying? And these are some of the things that we would explore. And to say, what is it that can shift you so that you either let go of complaining about your leader and start taking responsibility, or move and say, I'm going to move to a place that honors me, that treats me as a human being, and that unleashes my potential. Word of warning, most of us are not innocent in the behavioral problems that we face. And I'm a guilty person of that from my life. I've moved on to new organizations and find my boss is the same. And then I realized that I have a significant contribution to that problem. And I think as coaches, that's the unpleasant truth that coaches often have to speak to their clients, is to say, what is your role in this? And how are you enabling your boss? What can you do differently? Because it's easy to run away and find a new job. It's not as easy to learn how to manage a difficult boss and how to stand up for yourself and how to assert yourself in a healthy way. So there's multiple ways to look at that. There's nothing that is right or wrong. It means, what do you want? What is at stake for you? How important is that for you? And what else have you considered? So those are some of the things that comes to mind when I hear that question.
Great. Next question. We've just got 3 more questions left, so we'll wrap up after these. We got about 9 minutes. This is a general question followed by a very specific example. So how to define effective engagement? And then the specific example is, should a leader attempt to engage with the team even outside of working hours?
We have a bunch of really clever people around asking tough questions. So engagement is very easy. I like to go back to the root of concepts when I work with something. So where does coaching come from? Where were the coaches? What was the original coaching concept? And when we look at engagement, what was the original concept? And Kahn in 1990 defined coaching as the situation where people bring their heads, their hearts, and their hands to the organization in the service of the organization's objective. And I love simplistic, it's much more complex than that, but I love a simplistic model. So if your people are committing their heads, their hearts and their hands and their feet probably to your organization strategy in the service of your strategy and goals, they are engaged. It does not mean that they are happy. It does not mean, so happy cows give more milk, not happy employees. We are not pursuing happiness. We are pursuing engagement. So that means that people want to serve, they want to make the organization grow, they work towards, they are engaged, and they are aligned around your strategy, vision, and your goals. Then they are engaged. And there's easy ways to do that. We do employee engagement surveys, and we can measure that, and we can tell you where engagement, what the levels of engagement are. And that's where Gallup gets all of their data from. So there's a host of ways in which you can do it. The second part, Tony, remind me of the second part of the question.
That was, should a leader attempt to engage with the team outside of working hours?
That very much depends on the individual situation and what the impact is that you can achieve. So if you are comfortable not having strong boundaries, and if you can maintain your team effectiveness, and if you can maintain your leadership, then that happens. I think it depends on your level of comfort. If you have been a very rigorous, rigid, hierarchical leader, don't go and start socializing and partying and drinking with your employees after hours. Does that benefit the team or not? Is that your need or is that the team's need? And most of the time, it's somewhere in between. It's not cold, clinical, work at work and home at home. But you don't have to hang out all the time. You don't have to be best friends. Although Gallup asked that question in their famous Q12 survey, do I have a best friend at work? You don't have to be best friends with all of your employees. As long as they bring their heads, their hearts, and their hands to your organization, they are engaged. I find that I like a little bit of socializing beyond office hours, but that's my style. Are you comfortable with that? It needs to fit your style and meet your subordinates' needs. And in most cases, we need to teach our organizations how to be engaged because we come from centuries of hierarchical leadership where people find it much easier to just do what the boss tells them to do. So you may try to engage your team and find that it fails. There's a whole host of literature about that. So part of being a great leader is continuing to do that and educating, teaching people how to be engaged and not give up when they don't respond to the cues the first time that you're trying to do that.
Great. Thank you, Henry. Just two more questions. This question is about how can a leader know if they are receiving the right coaching, especially during the current situation where virtual coaching is required?
I guess it's more on whether a leader knows that they are doing the right thing in coaching their team. Because leaders play the role as a coach at work. How do they know if they're doing the right thing?
Okay, that triggers three things. Are leaders doing the right thing? Am I getting the right coaching? I don't think that was the original question. And virtual. So can I start with the one that I like most? Virtual is you will not die if you get virtual coaching. It probably makes coaching more flexible and more agile, and it allows us to do better work, more targeted, more of the time by coaches. In Hong Kong, coaches spend more than half their time traveling from client to client. So instead of doing that, they can be more productive, more optimized, and bring a better, clearer state of mind to you when they coach. I love face-to-face, and I do my best to meet my clients in person. But some of the most powerful transitions and breakthroughs that my clients have had been on voice only, not even video, voice only. So trust me, you will not die, and ask from your coach to sometimes engage, because that makes your coach accessible more hours of the day while you're traveling, and you should make use of that. I probably should have said that more often. If I coach people as a leader, how do you know if it's working? Very easily. Are they thinking for themselves? If people come to your office and say, Serena, how do I solve this problem? Your first question should be, tell me how far you got by yourself. Where did you get yourself? What options have you considered instead of saying, oh, I'm the expert on this, let me fix that for you. So if you want to see if coaching is working, the first sign is people can think for themselves. They come up with their own actions and their own solutions. Secondly, those solutions are creative and out of the box. That's the next step. It's from not thinking to thinking effectively and creatively. And then the third thing is often people are thinking, but they're not equipped to do that. So do they come up with great ideas that are also related to the market, that are effective, that reflects good knowledge, skills, and insight and wisdom? But we can always teach people market conditions. We can always teach people models. We can't teach them how to think. So for coaching, the most important thing is, where is the monkey? Is the monkey on your subordinate shoulder, so they own the problem, or do they put the monkey on your shoulder and you are carrying it? Test number one in all coaching processes.
Right. Thank you, Henry. So last question before we wrap up. I'm just going to interpret this one a little bit. I think it raises an interesting point. With the current situation and crisis management happening in many organizations, how can a leader bring change? I think what they're getting at here is, with so much change happening in their environment and in the world in general, is it the right time to bring change to an organization? And how can a leader approach that?
Again, there's multiple questions rolled up in that one. So is it the right time? Unfortunately, the VUCA world says we don't get to choose the right time for change. Change is often created or pushed on us by the environment. So in most of the cases, you don't get to vote on whether you want to change or not. It's how effective and how fast and how effective you can change. If you are not forced to change, the next question is my organization ready for it? Do we have the momentum and do we have the energy to do that? And do we have the support to make that happen? That's a change management question that I think there's a lot of questions behind that. But the big question is, why do I want to make this change? Is it in the interest of the organization? And do we have the mental, emotional, and physical energy to drive that? So I think that's a really important question. And then should I or should I not do it? Or how do I do it? This is the core of what I'm talking about today. Have you made the change? Are you ready? And change starts with yourself. A lot of people want to coach other people while they are standing behind the door themselves, or they are not setting the example, or they don't do what they coach other people to do. So first of all, great leaders set the example. Great leaders lead from the front. So I come from a military background. It's not as hierarchical as you think. There's a lot of charisma. There's a lot of trust. There's a lot of not so hierarchical stuff around it. And the great leaders are the ones who are trusted by their subordinates, who set the example and to live lives of integrity. And you don't have to be a good boy or a good girl. Integrity means that people know what to expect of you. If you drink with your friends and you drink too much, that's fine. You don't pretend to say that drinking is wrong today and tomorrow you're drinking with your friends. So consistency, integrity, and people knowing who you are. And I think that comes back to why we need coaching. That dog, or the fight in the dog. Let's unleash that fight in the dog. But it's also owning all of the characteristics. You may be an ugly mongrel. I don't care. You don't have to be a poodle or a well-groomed poodle. We work with the dogs as they are in coaching. And there's a lot more work to be done in getting you change ready and getting you confident about yourself and standing firmly and facing those changes with wisdom than it is about the planning and the strategizing and the intellectual stuff around that. So that would be, I hope I cover all of the aspects of that question.
Thanks, Henry. Just let me say this for closing. So there is a lot we cannot control, but let's focus on the things we can. And what we can do is equip ourselves and prepare for the next wave. We know that there will be new challenges within your organization, in Hong Kong, or even in the world. But another trait of a growth mindset is to recognize that we don't have all the answers and we should proactively seek help. So by being here today, I think you are also intentional about your leadership and growth. I hope you've learned something new today. Please feel free to get in touch with Henry. His contact is on the screen, and feel free to get in touch with me as well if you'd like more ideas on how to future-proof yourself and your organization. Thank you again for joining us today.
Thank you very much for being with me.